Good morning. Well, since the computer system at Schreiner University is down, I thought that I would probably, since I can't do anything on my computer, I would try to get ahead. And so this is the very first lecture of the third testing period of History 2303. When we talked last time, we talked about the growing response to Texas agricultural problems and the fact that Texas, after it was redeemed from Democratic control, radical Republican control, nevertheless by the end of the 1880s had a problem. The truth of the matter is that farmers were in terrible economic shape in Texas. And one of the first organizations to come to Texas was, in the 1870s, the Grange, the Patrons of Husbandry. We've already talked about the Patrons of Husbandry, but the Patrons of Husbandry was a social organization, essentially, that came to Texas because, life was difficult out on the frontier if you were an agricultural community. And if it was hard for men, it was very difficult for their wives and their children. The lack of socialization. So on Sunday afternoons, the Grange would have picnics, etc. But inevitably, the picnics turned to the questions of the problems of the farmer. And we know that the Grange particularly wanted the railroads in the South, and particularly in Texas, to be regulated. And so and they would in 1876 in the new state constitution of Texas of 1886. The Grange insisted on railroad regulation in Texas. But in the 1880s, a new organization would come to Texas called the Farmers Alliance. The Farmers Alliance actually started in Lampasas, Texas, north of Austin, in 1877. But the following year, the lodge that was created at Lampasas, Texas, was disbanded over the question of greenbacker politics. The greenbackers were a political group that wanted to greatly inflate the economy of Texas and the United States to make it easier for farmers to pay off their debts. School teacher William Baggett moved from Lampasas to Parker County, Texas, where he set up a school and created a sub-alliance, a subunit of the Farmers Alliance. And it was so successful, this first establishment in Parker County of an alliance, that the movement very quickly spread throughout Texas and became so financially viable that the alliance could hire a traveling lecturer by the name of S.O. Dawes, D-A-W-E-S, by 1884. Attacking monopolies, particularly monopolies that impacted negatively the life of Texas farmers, and criticizing unsympathetic politicians in Washington and Austin that didn't want to help the American farmer, the charismatic S.O. Dawes literally organized hundreds of local subunits of the alliance, and not only did he set up subunits of the alliance throughout North Texas, but he even reached out to fellow reformers, encouraging temperance advocates, people who wanted to do away with the consumption of alcohol in order to improve American life. And Dawes even suggested there was a place for the Knights of Labor, interested in labor reform, obviously, in the ranks of the Farmers Alliance. In 1886, black farmers in Houston, Texas, formed the first what was called the Texas Colored Alliance, because obviously in the South, after the Civil War, we had a segregated society, black and white. And so the benevolence of Texas white farmers didn't necessarily extend to black farmers, even though 90 98% of Texans were engaged in agriculture. So the first colored alliance was established in 1886 in Houston, Texas, the Texas Colored Alliance. That very year, 1886, Congress passed a law to assist drought-ridden Texas farmers. But President Grover Cleveland stunned the Texas delegation by vetoing the bill, claiming that it was an inappropriate national government action to assist farmers just within one state. Texas Alliance members felt betrayed, and as a result of President Cleveland's veto of this farm bill of 1886, S.O. Dawes proposed what has historically been called the Dawes Formula. The Dawes Formula. As an organization, after 1886, the Alliance would promote non-political farmer education and cooperation with anyone, but as an organization. But as individuals, individual Alliance members would be free to engage in their own choice of political action. So individual farmers in the South who were Democrats would support the Democratic, would try to support change within the Democratic Party, just as in the northern parts of the United States, out on the Great Plains of the Dakotas and Kansas, even as this alliance was developing in the South among Democrats, farmers who were traditionally Republicans out on the Great Plains began to form what was called the Northern Alliance. And the Northern Alliance farmers, would seek reforms through the Republican Party. But the Dawes Formula said, as a national organization, the Farmers Alliance would stay out of politics, but individual farmers were encouraged to express their political views. In Texas, in 1886, at the Cleburne, Texas State Alliance Convention, the Texas Alliance made a series of political demands, including the recognition of labor unions in Texas. They wanted Texas banking to be regulated. They called for inflation on behalf of Texas farmers, inflated economic currency. They called for prison reform, and they called for legislation outlawing speculation in agricultural futures and in land. Some Alliance members in 1886, meeting in their state convention, feared that the Democrats would be alienated. The Democrats were the major political party in Texas, and other Alliance members who were very strong in their beliefs said, you know what, we don't care. We don't care if the state Democratic Party is offended by our demands. And these more militant Alliance members created what was called the Grand State Alliance, and they elected Charles McCune, M-A-C-U-N-E, Charles McCune, as the new state president of the Grand Alliance of Texas. As such, McCune became president of an alliance that was filled with radicals who said, we don't care if we offend the Democratic Party of Texas, and a minority of farmers who said, but yes, we're concerned that our opposition to the Democratic Party will bring scorn down on this new Grand Alliance. So McCune had to expand his new Grand State Alliance, and he reached out and he merged and joined with an organization in Arkansas called the Arkansas Wheel, W-H-E-E-L, and the Louisiana Farmers Union. Those three organizations, the Arkansas Wheel, the Louisiana Farmers Union, and the Texas Grand Alliance, formed what was be called the Farmers Alliance and Cooperative Union of America, but would be informally called the Southern Alliance Movement, because, as I said before, Republicans up in the Midwest in the Dakotas, North and South Dakota, and in Kansas, were forming a Northern Alliance, even as McCune was expanding and creating a Southern Alliance movement. Because no matter where you went in this country, whether it was among the Democratic farmers of the South or the Republican Midwestern farmers of the Dakotas to Kansas, farmers were in a terrible economic strait. McCune even favored the creation in Texas of the Texas Alliance Exchange. The Texas Alliance Exchange, which he believed would revolutionize marketing. The way the Texas Alliance Exchange worked was that every alliance member was supposed to go down and borrow money from a bank. And then that alliance member would, in fact, turn over that money, which they had received from a bank, to a farmers' alliance in Texas, an alliance exchange. The alliance exchange would go out and buy agricultural commodities in bulk at a reduced price, and then in turn sell to individual farmers at a reduced price. Excuse me, allergies. McCune became the exchange manager when the Alliance Exchange opened its doors in Dallas, Texas in September of 1887. It made perfect sense to him that individual alliance members would join the exchange, take out loans from banks, turn that money over to the Alliance Exchange, and the Alliance Exchange would buy at bulk at reduced prices and sell to farmers at equally reduced prices. But banks very quickly figured out what the exchange was about and refused to loan money in advance to farmers, i.e. the banks withheld cash, and the exchange idea was soon doomed. Within 1 year of operation, the Alliance Exchange failed, and McCune came to the conclusion that only direct federal assistance to assist the farmer could solve the nation's problems and help the farmer who was so indebted in the was so in debt relative to loans. At the 1889 National Alliance Convention, Charles McCune outlined a new plan, which he called the Sub-Treasury Plan. And his Sub-Treasury Plan called on the United States Congress to authorize the building of a nationwide system of warehouses where farmers could deposit their crops at harvest time, particularly if the market value of their individual commodity was low at the point of harvest, and a farmer could receive low-cost government loans in greenbacks, paper money, that would help to inflate the entire monetary system of America. Stored crops would be released back to the farmer for sale on the open market when market prices were sufficiently high. That is literally the very program that the United States government today provides American farmers. When wheat is harvested out on the Midwest, in the Midwestern plains, if the per unit price of wheat is low, farmers store their wheat until wheat prices are sufficiently high that farmers will go out and go back and redeem and get their crops out of storage and sell their crops at a higher price when the market is better. And we do that routinely today. But the National Democratic Party categorically rejected the idea of McCune's Sub-Treasury Plan. And the Republican-controlled Congress of the United States categorically refused to adopt the Sub-Treasury Plan. Why? Because the Congress of the United States, by 1889 and 1890, was controlled by big business. And big business wanted the Congress to pass laws that would reflect sympathy to big business, not to the little man, i.e. the farmer, be it in Texas or anywhere else in the nation. So as the economy continued to sour going into the 1890s, due largely to national inaction and inability to draft laws to assist farmers. Many alliance members would begin to adopt third-party politics under a new political banner called the People's Party of America. We know their organizing efforts today as the Populist Party, the Populists of America. Nationally, some Texas Democrats continued to seek agrarian relief in Congress. Texas Congressman Roger Q. Mills, M-I-L-L-S, advocated a lowering of the import tax to force United States manufacturers to lower their prices. That would have helped American farmers. It didn't happen. And Texas United States Senator John H. Reagan co-authored the Interstate Commerce Bill of 1887 to regulate the railroads, which was a great help to farmers all over this country. But eventually, Texas Democrats abandoned the gold supporter, their president, Grover Cleveland, and embraced the principle of free silver that would inflate the economy of the nation and make debts that farmers owed easier to pay. Reform Democrats argued for a more active state government, and among those who called for reform within the Texas Democratic Party was James Stephen Hogg, H-O-G-G, of Texas. James Stephen Hogg, was the Texas Attorney General from 1887 to 1891, and then Hogg served as governor from 1891 to 1895. The rise of the Texas Alliance movement pushed Hogg to reform the Texas Democratic Party, and Hogg argued for the regulation of Texas railroads and the prevention of foreign ownership of Texas lands. As Attorney General, James Stephen Hogg forced the return of 1.5 million acres of public lands from the railroads and other corporations that had been given grants of land in Texas, but had sat on and had not done anything to improve those holdings. He also made land companies sell to settlers within a certain time period in hopes of helping to control land speculation within the state of Texas. James Stephen Hogg also made out-of-state insurance companies obey Texas state law, even if their headquarters were outside of the state. In 1891, the Texas Commissioner of Agriculture estimated that James Stephen Hogg, as Attorney General of Texas, had saved Texans $250,000 a year through his aggressive attorneyship as the Texas State Attorney General. In other words, he had sued and he had saved Texans about $250,000 for 4 consecutive years while Attorney General of Texas. Many agricultural farmers favored James Stephen Hogg because he had attacked the railroads and the trusts. And Hogg continued to assist with the writing of antitrust legislation, and Texas passed was only the second state of the Union to pass antitrust legislation. And James Stephen Hogg forced many Texas railroads to restore their headquarters back to the state of Texas and to keep railroad equipment and track in good working order. Hogg ran for governor in November of 1890 on the premise that he wished to have a state railroad regulatory commission created. And in the 1890 election, Hogg defeated Republican Webster Flanagan, and he supported a constitutional amendment that would legalize a Texas Railroad Commission. The amendment passed, and in 1891, the Texas Railroad Commission was created by the legislature, and the legislature called for 3 appointed members to the Texas Railroad Commission. Hogg appointed the first 3 Texas Railroad Commissioners, including United States Senator John Reagan, who came back to Texas to head the Texas Railroad Commission. But Hogg offended the Farmers Alliance when he didn't ask their opinion about who the 3 members should be. In 1894, 3 years into the operations of the Railroad Commission, the membership of the Railroad Commission was made elective to satisfy many of the populace, and the power to regulate railroads in Texas was upheld by the United States Supreme Court in the very significant case of Reagan versus Farmers Loan and Trust. And so the United States Supreme Court said, yes, it is legal for Texas to regulate the operations of railroads within the state of Texas. As governor, James Stephen Hogg supported the following policies. He believed in railroad stock and bond laws to regulate the operations and ownership of railroads. Secondly, he wanted a law forcing foreign corporations to sell Texas land within 15 years, or else that land would revert back to the state of Texas. He wanted a restriction on the indebtedness that counties and cities could take. And in other words, unlike the national government that today has no limit to the amount of deficit spending, the Constitution of Texas limits the amount of debt indebtedness of any county or city depending on their population. James Stephen Hogg was responsible for that. James Stephen Hogg favored prison reform. He supported higher educational expenditures for both University of Texas and Texas A&M. And unfortunately, as a white Democrat, James Stephen Hogg supported segregated railroad facilities, separate facilities in the railroads for blacks and whites Texans. Hogg retired in 1896 from the governorship of Texas, and he went heavily into the East Texas oil fields, and eventually James Stephen Hogg would make millions of dollars in Texas land and petroleum development. But what militant alliance men wanted was not government regulation of the railroads. They wanted the government to own outright the railroads so that there would be no further manipulation by big businessmen. They wanted abolition of the banking system, not regulation of the banking system. And militant alliance men favored the sub-treasury plan of McCune. So James Stephen Hogg didn't do enough in their eyes to reform the state of Texas. These alliance men also favored a graduated income tax. They favored an 8-hour workday, the Australian secret ballot, the direct election of United States Senator, referendum and recall, very forward-looking reforms to change the political system in Texas. So as far as they're concerned, in their view, James Stephen Hogg as governor didn't do enough, even though he did support the Texas Railroad Commission, etc. When the Texas Democratic Party wouldn't outright endorse the sub-treasury plan of McCune, those who favored the sub-treasury plan said, you know what, we're going to engage in political activity and we're going to call ourselves populist. We're going to oppose the Democrats, like James Stephen Hogg, who did not support a sub-treasury plan to be established in Texas. The 1890s populist farmers' crusade relied heavily on speakers to get the word out about populism. Speakers like Stump Ashby, a Methodist preacher, W.R. Lamb, who was a labor leader, Thomas Nugent, who used to be a Democratic state judge in Texas, Cyclone Davis, the great stump speaker, called Cyclone because of his great energy, Ben Terrell and Jerome Kernsby, who were farmer greenbackers. A whole bunch of different folks advocated for the populist movement in Texas. Texas populists were even biracial, relying heavily on East Texas voters in their challenge against the Texas Democratic state political machine. J.B. Rayner, a black ex-Republican from Calvert, Texas, over in East Texas, served on the Texas Populist Executive Committee in the 1890s. And in 1892, when George Clark, a former Confederate and former Texas Attorney General, who was closely identified with railroads and big business in Texas, opposed the re-election of James Stephen Hogg as governor. The many Democrats literally opted to support the populist Tom Nugent, and so in 1892, Texas Democrats faced a challenge within their ranks and a challenge coming from the populist political party. Democrats in the election of 1892 used violence and fraud in some cases to counter Republican appeals to black voters to support the populists. And James Stephen Hogg won in 1892, garnering 190,000 votes to his Democratic challenger Nugent's 108,000, but Clark, the populist candidate, received 133,000 votes. The populist in that election won 8 state House seats and 2 state Senate seats, or 1 state Senate seat in Texas, 8 Texas House seats and 1 Texas Senate seat within the state of Texas. There were an estimated 200,000 Alliance members in Texas in 1894, and that was enough Alliance members that the Texas Democratic Party had to reunite. And so, Texas Democratic leader Edward M. House of Austin, who had managed Hogg's campaigns for governor, and a man who understood politics, brokered a truce between the pro-Hogg and anti-Hogg Nugent Democrats, and in 1894, Edward M. House skillfully led Texas Attorney General James Culberson to the Democratic nomination for governor, despite the fact that James Stephen Hogg wanted John Reagan, the head of the Texas Railroad Commission, to become the next governor of Texas. Colonel House would remain behind the scenes a Democratic leader for the next 20 years. But the truth is that in 1894 and 1896, Texas populists continued to make inroads. In fact, in 1896, the Texas populist candidate for governor, Jerome Kernby, lost to Culberson by only 60,000 votes, the Democratic candidate Culberson, by only 60,000 votes. But what did the populists end in Texas? The Depression of 1892 to 1896 began to wind down, and by 1896 the Depression was no more. And as a result, economic prosperity, returned economic prosperity, sealed the fate of the Populist Party in America and in Texas. Most Texas populists returned to the Democratic Party, or they became even more radical and became socialist as a result of the return to prosperity. The Texas populist challenge to the Democrats of Texas and to the Democratic parties of most southern states triggered a violent backlash against Texas black voters. Indeed, if whites were ever to politically disagree again without serious consequences, the only way, it was thought, to prevent another Reconstruction-like scenario where one faction aligned with Negroes would take over, as E.J. Davis and the Radical Republicans had courted the black vote during Reconstruction, was to essentially disenfranchise all black voters, black men, voting in Texas. Very soon, what was called Texas White Men's Associations would advocate an all-white Texas primary where no Negro could vote. And by 1903, it was up to the executive committees of each Texas county to identify who could or could not vote in that party's statewide primary. And in 1902, the Texas legislature considered and put forth, and the voters approved, a poll tax, P-O-L-L tax, that would disenfranchise equally many poor whites and Negroes. Let me talk just briefly about the poll tax. and we'll get almost to the point where we need to end this tape. But the truth is that the poll tax cost about only $1 and to buy. It wasn't prohibitively expensive. The issue, one moment, I'll be right back.